Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to replace the alternator in my 2001 Isuzu Rodeo. I'm doing this for several reasons, which I explain in the troubleshooting video that I have posted separately, and you can find that link in this video description, or I will also have a link pop up about now that you can click. So if you're trying to trace a problem and you're not sure if it's the alternator, check that out first. Hopefully that'll help you confirm the issue, and then if it is your alternator, you can come back to this one to see how to replace it. I've already confirmed it, like I said, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. I will say that I've not done this on this particular vehicle, so it's going to be a little bit of a learning process, so bear with me. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing we need to do, obviously, is to remove the battery. In my case, there's a 10mm nut on the negative and on the positive cable, so I'm going to remove those. And then there's a 12mm nut here holding this bracket that anchors the battery. Just take this off, and you can see this bracket's kind of loose. You can swing, you lift the battery handle up, you can swing this around to this side, and then you can pull the battery up out of the way. I'm going to do that now, and we will dive a little deeper. Okay, the battery's out of the way now, and I think the next thing I'm going to do is to disconnect this lower radiator hose, because there's a bracket that holds it here just above the alternator here, and I'm not sure the alternator is going to be able to clear that hose with it in the way. Now, I do have a copy of the service manual, and it's not very helpful. You can see here, removal, disconnect the battery ground cable, which we've done, move the belt tensioner, and get the belt out of the way, which we'll get to in a second. Disconnect the terminals, the wire connections from the alternator itself, then remove the bolts for the alternator, and then remove the alternator assembly. That's kind of oversimplified when you stand here and look at this thing. I'm positive that this hose has got to come out of the way. So I'm going to start there. Then we'll take a look at removing the belt tensioner, or the serpentine belt itself. So there's a squeeze clamp here, and then I will figure out what size bolt goes here on this retaining clip. And that should give me, this thing's obviously very flexible, so that should give me the room I need to get it out of the way. If you're going to do this, just make sure you have something ready to catch any coolant that spills out of here. And if you get any on your driveway, make sure you clean it up, especially if you got pets. You don't want them licking that, because it can make them very sick or kill them. So I'm going to get this out of the way, and we will work on the belt tensioner next. Alright, you can see I've gotten the radiator hose removed, or disconnected and pulled out of the way. This ended up being a 12mm bolt that goes through the bracket into that hole right there. And I just had another short section of radiator hose laying around that I slipped over the upper outlet here just to catch any residual. There was a little bit in there dripping out, so that's angled up so that it won't leak. I've just got this tucked out of the way here. That should give me enough room, I hope. So the next thing I want to do is remove the serpentine belt, and as you can see, I've got a long wrench here with a 14mm socket on it. Put on the bolt in the center of the tensioner pulley, which will allow me to relieve the tension on the serpentine belt like that by turning it clockwise. You can see the tension relieve in the belt. So you're going to need one hand to hold this, or a helper to hold the wrench like that, while you use the other hand to pull the belt off the alternator pulley here and get it out of the way. Once it's removed, then you can relieve the tension like on the tensioner pulley like that, and just make note of how the belt is routed so that you can put it back in the correct orientation. I usually take photos just to make sure. You don't want to get something wrong and have a pulley spinning in the wrong direction potentially. So I'm going to go ahead and take a photo of this, get the belt out of the way, and then we will move on to disconnecting the wiring from the alternator. Okay, you can see I've gotten the serpentine belt pulled out of the way. I'm not going to completely remove it just because I don't really have to. I just pulled the slack back over here and we've got clear access to the alternator. So the next thing we want to do is disconnect the wiring from it. This part is pretty tight to get to, but hopefully you can see the harness here. If you follow the positive battery cable, and if you've watched my troubleshooting video, I've already shown this, but this harness here from the positive cable runs around the battery tray, down underneath it, and you can see it down here, right there, running along the frame, and you follow it back. It branches off, a smaller portion of it branches off right there, but the main section continues back. And that's where we're going to find our two connections. So that branch right there goes to an actual electrical connector here on the bottom of the alternator. And I'll show you when I pull this off. I've already loosened this one, but there's a tab on the top on this side where I'm pointing with my index finger. If you push that way, if you squeeze it in that way and pull down or pull towards you, it'll come off. Let me just remove it and you'll be able to see better. So that's what the connector looks like. This thing right here, you can squeeze. See how it pushes down? And that relieves the releases the clip, and then you can pull it out that way. Okay, so that's one connection. The other is on the back of the alternator. Hopefully you can see on camera. Okay, I got the camera to focus. Hopefully you can see right here where I'm pointing. This is the other connection on the back of the alternator. There should be a threaded stud right here coming out this way on the back of the alternator. And in my case, the whole reason I'm having to replace the alternator is that when I went to remove the nut that affixes your wire to that stud, the nut had seized to the stud, and when I tried to get it off, the stud just broke off completely. So if you're working on this and you're not actually replacing the alternator itself, I would recommend soaking that with a penetrant like PB Blaster before you try to remove it. You know, if you're replacing it, I guess it doesn't really matter if the stud snaps off like mine did. But anyway, that's why I'm doing this. So in my case, I don't really need to take that stud off because it's already, or take that nut off because it's already gone. But you should have a stud here with a nut. I think in my case, I think it's 10 millimeter. In fact, here's the new unit, and you can see right here, that's what it should look like. So I think this is a 10 millimeter nut with a little washer attached. So you'll remove that, and then your wiring connection should slip right off that stud. Okay, so those are the two wiring connections. Well, here you can also see what the connector looks like for the first one that I showed you. So that's what you're dealing with. The alternator should be sitting something like that in the vehicle. Okay, so it's on the back and on the left side, sort of angled down. So now that we got the connections out of the way, we just need to work on removing the alternator itself. Again, here's the service manual instructions. So it tells us to remove the 3 fixing bolts, number 3. So 1, 2, 3. Looks like maybe only 2 of those actually go through the alternator. 1 here and 1 there. I don't see another bolt hole in the alternator itself, but it looks like maybe this whole bracket has to come out as well, and maybe that bolt just goes through the bracket. I'm going to go ahead and pull, I think I'm going to pull these 2 and leave the top one for last and see what happens. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do actually is start with this bolt here, which is a 12 millimeter, and then I'm going to remove this one, which is a 14 millimeter. Those are the only 2 bolts I see going through the alternator. So I'm just going to do those 2 first and see if that allows it to come out. I'm not sure that it is, because I think the bracket here blocks the front of the alternator, and I'm not sure I have enough room to slide it towards the frame and clear everything, but we'll find out. So again, I'm going to start by removing this 12 millimeter and this 14 millimeter, and we'll see what happens. Okay, I got those 2 bolts removed. This is what they look like. This is the 14 millimeter. That's the 12 millimeter. And the alternator is definitely kind of loose now. And I can't tell if it's just binding on this bracket. So this bracket actually sandwiches the alternator front and back like that. And I can't tell if it's just tight on there, and that's why it won't come free. So I'm going to fiddle around a little bit, see if I can figure out what's holding it. I may get a small pry bar in here, just gently try to pry that bracket loose, see if it'll come out. So let me dig some more and I'll be right back. Okay, I think I'm making some progress here. It took me a few minutes of head scratching to figure out how to get this out, but I think I'm on the right track now. What I ended up doing is I reinstalled the 12 millimeter bolt on the bottom, so that could act as a pivot point, because the problem I was having was I could get the bottom out easily. It was this top connection that was pinched between that bracket that I couldn't get out. So I reinstalled the bottom bolt so the whole alternator can pivot around that. And then I took a pry bar like that, and I rested it on top of the alternator right there, and I just gently tapped the end with a hammer, and you can see now the alternator has started to rotate. You can just see the edge of the hole, the bolt hole right there that used to be in alignment with this hole. So you can see this piece here is starting to rotate this direction. So I'm going to finish flipping that around, and then I will take the bottom bolt out, and I'm hoping the whole assembly will slide right out. So give me a moment and we'll see what happens. Okay, that was definitely the trick. I just removed the 12 millimeter bolt from down here on the bottom, and now you can see the entire unit is loose. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to pull it clear through the front here. There we go, looks like it's coming. Let's hope it clears. I'm going to do this with 2 hands because you can see there's 2 transmission lines right there. I do not want to drop this thing on there, but I'm hoping that this will clear everything. May have to pull this radiator hose forward just a little bit and mash it down to get the alternator out, but I think that's going to be the trick. Let me get this thing out of here and we'll work on getting the new one in place. Alright, success. That worked. There is just enough room to push the alternator out past the brackets and everything here and pull it forward. And I did have to mash this radiator hose forward just a little bit, but I was able to just barely finagle it here between the fan blades, the tensioner pulley, and the battery tray. That worked great. Alright, so it's out. Here's my new unit, side by side with the old one. This is remanufactured. I would have preferred brand new, but here's what I got by CarQuest. It's got a limited lifetime warranty, so I feel pretty good about it. This was the only thing that my local store had in stock. I got this from Advanced Auto Parts. Everything looks the same here, so we are ready to go ahead and put this new one in. I think I'm going to spend just a couple minutes cleaning things up down there, and I'll get the new one in place and give you a quick look at how it goes in. Okay, before I put everything back together, I just wanted to give you another angle at how this fits in there. So I ended up removing the skid plate under the front of the vehicle, which you would do if you're changing the oil. If you watch my oil change video, there's two 14mm bolts here, just behind the bumper. You loosen those, and then there should be a couple of 14mm bolts here on this cross member at the back of the skid plate. You completely remove both of those. That'll allow the skid plate to drop down, and then the front of the skid plate has slotted holes, so you can push the skid plate forward to where the hole is larger, the slotted hole is larger, and it'll completely drop off these bolts and washers. And that gives you access under here. And I just wanted to give you a quick shot of where the alternator fits. So let's see if I can get my hand up in here. The point right there is that bracket. It sandwiches the front and the back of the alternator where the 14mm bolt goes. So you can see how it fits up in there. And I have a feeling what was going on here with it, why it was so tight, is this bushing here where the bolt goes through is not flush with the bracket on the back side. The bushing actually sticks proud of this bracket, and so I think that was pinching on the alternator itself. And then you can see these transmission lines that run directly below the alternator. They attach to this bracket right there, so that kind of surrounds the alternator. So it is a tight fit, but you can definitely get it out from the top like I just did. Alright, I am ready to put the new alternator in place now. I'm going to see if I can do this on camera with one hand. Again, that's how it should go in. The larger hole here, the 14mm hole there. Electrical connections on the left side and rear, and then the 12mm bolt that goes down at the bottom. So, just to prove that it does fit, like I said, it goes in just like that. You got there you can see the spot where the 12mm bolt goes. You got to get that into that little pocket in the bracket like that, and then I'll need to rotate it up like that a little bit. It's going to take two hands, and I can already tell it's binding on that bracket just like it was when it came out, so I'm probably going to need to use a pry bar. I think I'm going to do the reverse of what I did last time. Or I guess the same thing I did last time. I'm going to put this bottom bolt in and allow that to be the pivot point, and then I can hopefully pry gently on this to get it in alignment with this 14mm bolt hole there. So let me get the lower one installed, and then I'll see if I can kind of pry it over to get the top bolt. Okay, that method worked like a champ. Once I got that 12mm bolt started, I was able to, I didn't even need to use a pry bar. I was able to just use my hand over here on the side and lift up, and the top portion slipped right up in between the bracket, and now I'm able to get the 14mm bolt in there and get started. So I'm going to tighten those up. Let's see, it looks like the torque spec is 41 Newton meters for the top bolt and 21 Newton meters for the lower bolt. So I will install those and torque them to spec, and then we will work on the wiring. Okay, I've gotten the bolts tightened and torqued. Here's a little tip. Take it from me because I just learned this lesson the hard way. Before you install the alternator, check the bolt hole on the bottom. Take the bolt and run it into this hole in the alternator before you put it in the vehicle, and confirm that the hole is not stripped. This is actually not the alternator you just saw me install in the previous clip. I had to go back to the store and get a second one because when I got the first one installed, I went to torque the bolts, and this top one was fine because that doesn't actually bolt into the alternator. It just passes through the alternator and bolts into the back side of the bracket that's threaded. The bottom one, though, does bolt into the alternator itself, and I found out that that hole was stripped. I just could not get the bolt to tighten, so I had to take the thing back out, go back to the parts store, and exchange it, and I just wasted a couple hours doing that. So, you know, I would just suggest you trying that before you put it in the vehicle so you don't learn the same lesson that I did. So anyway, I'm ready to start putting things back together now. I'm going to work on the wiring connections next. Okay, we're ready to reconnect the two electrical wires to the alternator. So I'm standing on the passenger side. There's the battery tray, and you can see me point to the new alternator, and you'll recall this connector attaches on the left side here, right under there where I'm pointing. You can't see it, but I can feel the connector with my finger, and it goes on like this, with the squeeze tab pointing towards the rear of the vehicle. So I just need to get that in position like so, and push it in to make sure it make sure it clicks into place and is secure. It feels like it has. I need to fix that wire loom to make sure it's protecting the wires. And then the other connection goes on the mounting stud right there. You can see I've already removed the 10mm nut, and so now we have our cable coming from the positive battery terminal. We just need to fit that ring terminal over that stud and then install the 10mm nut on there like so. I will need two hands to do that, but that's how that goes. I'll give you a quick look after I get the nut installed. And then there's a little protective cap that goes on there that I will put on place after that. Be right back. Okay, you can see I have reinstalled that cable and secured the nut. I did that with a little 10mm wrench like this. There's just enough room to get it in there and manipulate it. I have the offset going towards the front of the vehicle. I was able to actually reach my right hand in from this side and work it. So that's done. I need to put the protective cap over that, and then I actually have some extra slack here in my cable because I spliced in a new piece, so I've just secured that up out of the way with this zip tie. So the next thing I need to do is put the serpentine belt on. So let me reposition and we'll do that next. Okay, you can see I've reinstalled the serpentine belt. Again, it's the same process as before. Use your 14mm socket. It helps if you have an extension or a extendable handle to give you more leverage. So you turn it clockwise to relieve tension on the belt, and slip the belt over the new alternator pulley, and then just check and make sure all of that the belt is seated properly on all your pulleys, especially the ones that have the grooves and they have a rim around the outside. You don't want the belt to be kind of half sitting on that pulley. Looks like I'm good. So now I can go ahead and reposition the radiator hose like so. and I can reinstall, I believe it was a 12mm bolt. It goes in that hole right there, and then I can reconnect that to the outlet here. I'll be right back. Okay, I've gotten the radiator hose back in position. I did clean some of the corrosion off the outlet pipe here with some fine grit sandpaper. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. So I just need to reinstall this squeeze clamp with a pair of pliers. And then I've started the 12mm bolt there in the bracket. I'm gonna wait to tighten that until I know that this is reinstalled and oriented properly. And then we can reinstall the battery. Again, there's a bracket that goes across the top here, 12mm nut on this hook that engages with a hole in the side of the battery tray, like so. That nut tightens down on the top of that bracket, and then you've got a 10mm, should have a 10mm nut on both battery cable connections. Probably clean these up just a little bit before I reconnect the battery, and then we will test this out and see how it runs. Alright, I've got everything buttoned up. I did want to mention that if you did spill any coolant by disconnecting this hose, you want to just make sure your coolant system's topped off. So I took the radiator cap off and added some both to the radiator and to my reservoir over here. The system should not be under pressure when you take the cap off at this point, so it's a good idea to just go ahead and top it off. And then if you did take your skid plate off, don't forget to install that. Again, there's two 14mm bolts in the front that we loosened earlier just so that these slotted holes could slide over the bolt in the washer. To put the plate back on, you slip the large hole over the bolts and then push the plate backwards. And then in the back, there's two 14mm bolts. You can see I've already installed this one. I just need to install that one and tighten those up. And that's the end of the reassembly. So I'm going to button that up, put the radiator cap back on, and then we're going to start the engine and see how it runs. Well, good news. As you can see, the engine's running. Sounds great. Idle's nice and smooth. So I think this project is a success. All in all, I'd say this is probably a 2 or 3 hour job if you're taking your time. You know, a seasoned mechanic could probably knock it out in 30 or 45 minutes, but if it's the first time you tackle this job, you know, I would allot 2 or 3 hours for it, just so you can be methodical and take your time. So I hope that this video has been informational and helpful. It definitely took me longer than 2 or 3 hours just because I'd never done this job before and didn't know a couple of the tricks that I know now. So I hope this will be useful for those of you who need to do this project. Thanks for watching.